Today, I'm joined by Margaret Andrews. Margaret is a professional speaker, executive, academic leader, and instructor whose work has been featured in Forbes, Business Week, The Wall Street Journal. She teaches one of the most popular leadership classes and executive programs at Harvard University. She has held senior academic leadership roles at MIT and Harvard, built a career spanning CPA work, marketing and strategy consulting, and now leads the Milo Center, a private leadership development firm. She is the author of Manage Yourself to Lead Others, which helps leaders turn self-understanding into better decisions, stronger relationships, and a leadership style that actually works in the real world. And I'm excited to have her on the show to learn from her expertise. So, Margaret, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great to meet you. And I'm excited to talk about this work that you did and the book that you wrote, which was based on really what you've been teaching for years, right? And this book evolved from a class. Is that correct?
That's correct. I've been teaching the class for coming up on 20 years.
Wow.
And so it was something, I always think back to that very famous scene in Alien. Do you remember when the alien bursts forth from the person's chest? And I felt like there was a class in me that had to be born. So I think of it that way. And that was that class. And it's been going on for close to 20 years. And I've looked back at the slides that I created back then, and oh, they're terrible slides, but the bones and the arc of the class are the same. The stories are different, et cetera. But it was there and just got better over the years.
Well, that's fantastic. The book is called Manage Yourself to Lead Others. So tell us a little bit about what the main message of the book is and kind of what sets it apart from other leadership books.
Yeah. So the main idea of manage yourself to lead others is that understanding and managing yourself is the foundation for effective leadership. It's really an inside out proposition, and managing yourself comes before leading others. So what's different about this book is that it really talks a lot about why self understanding and self management are so important. And if you've ever had a not so good boss, you will oftentimes, if you really think about it, it's because they either or both didn't understand themselves well and how they came across to other people, or just did understand that, but just couldn't manage themselves very well. And so this is about the idea that we judge ourselves by our intentions. I mean to be a good teammate, I mean to be a good leader, but everybody else judges us by our intentions or by our behaviors. And so if your behaviors and your intentions aren't in alignment, you're going to feel very misunderstood.
Yeah, it's really interesting. When in my corporate career, I noticed that the bosses that I think you said it right. Their intentions were good, but their actions didn't match their intentions, and many of those didn't have they didn't have the emotional intelligence to realize or recognize the room or read the room, and they didn't realize that the kind of the damage they were doing by the work by their actions. But I think to your point, they meant well. They just didn't. They weren't doing
Yes.
things the right way, and I think what you say is really important is they didn't really understand themselves. They didn't understand the way they were coming across, whether they just sort of lacked that empathy or they lacked that emotional intelligence. But you could tell their intentions were good, but they just, they were cross-threaded every time they would do something. It would just cross-thread the room and get people angry. And I was just like, what is wrong with this leader? And I think what you're saying is
Yeah.
that having that self-understanding is really critical.
Yeah, and I think, I work with a lot of different folks, and I think that that is one of the hardest ones is that, they do have really good intentions and they're baffled by, why do people misunderstand what I'm trying to say? And
Mm.
very oftentimes is exactly what you said, that they didn't match.
So is there a way or a method, or is there ways that we can become more self-aware, we can become more better understanding of ourselves?
Yes. So, I use a lot of questions in the classes that I teach, and I have them also in the book. So, I start off with three questions of, what kind of leader are you now? What kind of leader would you like to become? And what's the delta, right? What's the difference between those
Yeah.
two? And therefore, that's, what you need to work on. But then I also use six questions. So I call them the six questions for understanding. And they're actually very big questions, especially the first one. I tell people you should spend a minimum of 5 to 10 minutes per question on your first pass. Then you should go back the next day or over the weekend or whatever it is, and continue looking at them, because every time you look at these questions and your answers, you will see something a little differently, or you'll make connections that you hadn't made before. And just very quickly, those questions are around, who and whose thinking have shaped you as an individual. And these are, of course, your family members and community and your baseball coach and your college roommate and things like that, but it's books you read and movies you saw and conversations that you had. The second one is around what events have shaped you, and this is oftentimes lucky and unlucky accidents.
Mm.
We know what the unlucky ones are, but we all have actually a lot of very lucky accidents in our life. That you happen to be standing there when somebody came by, or you misdialed and you got a better number, something like that. And then the third one is around, your values. What are your values? Um, and then the fourth, fifth, and sixth are around your definition of success, your personal definition, not society's, and that's your personal life and your professional life. Also around how to what extent you understand your own emotions. And if your answer is, I'm not sure, we know what the answer is. If you're not sure, then you probably aren't. And then the last question is around feedback, and that is, what type of feedback have you received over your life, in your personal and professional life?
Yeah.
And very oftentimes, all of these answers to these questions sort of point at each other. So the sixth one around feedback very oftentimes points back to number five, that the feedback we're getting is about how our behaviors impact other people, which is around our emotions. So they're all intertwined. They're big questions, and they take some time to really think about them and let it soak in. And as I say to people, you should tell on yourself, right? Go ahead and that it's for you. You really want to get to the bottom of it.
That's really interesting. Do you, as part of the process, do they seek feedback from others as well?
It can be. So I tell people, you can take this in many, many different directions. And so, lots of people, myself included, have old performance reviews, right? So you can
Oh,
pull them out
I
or
like
print
that.
them out or whatever. And, when you're looking at it with this lens, you do see patterns. And sometimes things change because, as you know, as you go up in levels of leadership, what's required of you changes.
Mm.
So you have to sort of shift some of your behaviors, and those can be sticky. Those sticking points when you're all of a sudden at a new level and you're expected to behave a little bit differently, and that can be hard.
It's interesting you bring that up because I think I found that in my career, right? I started off sort of as an engineer. I got hired as an engineer, and then I eventually ran departments, and started running factories, and then I ran multiple factories. And so my role went from being around people, day-to-day conversations and having really relationships with people, to being, I had large organizations reporting to me.
Mm.
And so my life revolved around PowerPoint presentations and making sure to have relationships with key people that are going to help my businesses succeed. And I actually didn't like it. Like I didn't
Hmm.
like moving up. And so I found myself, and maybe I was probably good enough to be self-aware that I didn't care for. I preferred to be around people, and around people, the people that were doing the work and having those conversations. So when I became an entrepreneur, I found like my joy. Like this was where I want to be. So do you find that people, when they maybe do these self-evaluations, might realize that they're not in the right role, or they moved, beyond a place where they were happy, and into a place that where maybe success wasn't what they thought it would be?
Yes, and actually, I love your story because it's not as uncommon as people think.
Yeah.
That when you get to, you think, oh, I want to be up there or something like
Right.
that. And up there is kind of vague. But when they get there and they think, oh, this isn't what I thought,
Yeah.
right? I don't like this. And I think this is very true. Sometimes, we used to say in consulting, you go from doing the work to managing the work to selling the work.
Yeah.
And some people like one of those levels better.
Yeah.
And but it takes some self-awareness to understand that. And kudos to you for doing that, because a lot of times I think this can cause problems in management, is when you really liked being with the people and you're way up here, you're going to constantly dip down and do that,
Yeah.
and maybe not make the people that work for you very happy. So I'm not saying you did that, but I see that a lot, because
Oh
people are
yeah.
going
Yeah.
to what they really like to do, and that's not their job anymore.
Yeah. I remember feeling jealous of my factory managers. I'm like, I wish I
Yeah,
had that
yeah,
job. Like, that's the
yes.
coolest job in the world. You have the cool job. I have the, not so cool job.
No, I totally agree with that. I knew one time when I was doing consulting that I had to go back and own the problem, because I remember thinking I was jealous of my clients' problems,
Mm,
which sounds crazy, but
yeah.
it's like, no, I want that to be my problem because I want to solve it. I
Oh,
want to get in there and do it. And I thought, okay, it's time for me to go back.
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And one of the things you say is part of the questions is to define success. And I think that's a very interesting thing, because I think if we look at what the world says success is, what is, maybe you have money, you have a big house, you have a fancy car, whatever. But I think for each individual, it's success has got to be, you've got to really think about that. It's not the
Yes.
obvious what you might see on the internet or on TV, right? What success is. It's different for every person.
It is. And the other thing too is a lot of times people will say, well, success to me is I get to a certain level, or I have a certain amount of money in the bank, or right, these kinds of things. Very external measures.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and 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 I'll oftentimes ask them, well, why that number? Right? Why
Hmm.
that number? Or, what is it that's so magical about that position? And then what happens is you start to get to values that people
Oh yeah.
want, maybe recognition, or they want to be seen as successful. But that's not actually what's going to float their boat. But they're not fully aware of that. So sometimes when you get underneath those things that I'll say society tells us we want, which I always say, we could wrap it up into one word, which is more.
Hmm.
Whatever you have, more is success. But that's not really what it is for most people.
Yeah. Yeah. I was asked on a podcast one time how I define success. I was the guest, not the interviewee.
Hmm.
But they asked me what I thought of a success, and I said to me it's like that few minutes where you achieve a goal that you've been working for years, and it's that few minutes you sit back after you've achieved that goal and say, "Wow, I did it." And it's just
Yeah,
that one
yeah.
moment where you just sort of say, "Wow, I've been through all this and I did it." It's sort of that to me is always in that's the definition of success is doing something really hard and then getting it done. Getting to something that you've
Hmm.
always, you know, dreamed of doing or had, worked hard to get. And those have been my moments of success. And it's just so for me, it's always been about sort of that little rest period after achieving something very difficult.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And it's that rest period sometimes, and then your mind flips over to, okay, what next?
what's next?
What's next?
Yes, I have that terrible personality of what's next.
Oh, it's not a terrible personality trait. Lots of things in this world wouldn't happen if you didn't have that.
That's probably true. Probably true. But so can you tell us a little bit about like what changes with leaders who go through this process of self-awareness
Hmm.
and asking themselves these difficult questions and kind of wrestling with these answers? What tends to happen to these type of leaders?
Yeah. So, the self-understanding part, I think, is hard because it's emotional work and it's looking inside. And, a fair number of people have things in their past that they really would prefer not to revisit,
Hmm.
some hard things. But and I always love this quote by C.S. Lewis, where he says, "You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending." And I think that is such a lovely idea, because we have a lot of agency in terms of what happens next to us, or
Hmm.
how we respond to things. So that's the self-understanding part. But then you get to, okay, what do I want? What does success mean to me? What are my values? And to your point, sometimes it's, am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right job?
Hmm.
And perhaps I am, but what do I need to work on in terms of, usually it's around behaviors. I want to be able to delegate more effectively. I want to listen more intently to people. How, whatever it is that people want. That gets into self-management. And the self-management part is actually very hard too. And this is very oftentimes where we get to that intentions and behaviors not matching.
Mm,
And so, a couple of things I'll say there. One is that I introduced the idea of S curves, and that is that the way we get better is slowly and then quickly, and then we level off. And oftentimes when you're starting a new skill or behavior, that you get worse before you get
mm,
better.
yes.
And this is hard for a lot of high achieving people because you've worked your whole life not to get worse. But it's a new behavioral skill that you're learning, and you're not going to be good at it. And so I think that the self management part is one that, and I take people through, listen, you've done this your whole life. But as you move up in leadership, the hard part is that more people see you when you're learning it. And that can be very uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah. And I think too, a lot of people give up when they see something not working out. Like you said, if they
Yes.
so in the early stages, you kind of stink at it. Like when I started this podcast, I was terrible. I go back and listen to the first few episodes. I'm like, oh my goodness, you know. But I've been
Yes.
doing it for 6 years now, and I feel really comfortable doing it. And I feel like I found my voice now. But in the beginning, it was awkward. I think when I first started writing a
Yes.
book, it didn't feel right, and I kept thinking, who's going to read this? This is ridiculous. This is a waste of my time. But it was this uncomfortable feeling of doing something new and doing something different. And it's like trying to write with your non-dominant hand, right? It just feels
Hmm.
uncomfortable and you just want to quit. But what you're saying is that there's an S curve. So you've got to get through the hard
Yeah.
parts to get to where you start becoming good at things, at
That's
something
right.
new.
That's right. And a lot of times you're right. And that is the thing is a lot of times people do quit.
Mm,
And that is oftentimes why we end up with not so good bosses is because they're trying to learn this new behavior and they will say, "Oh, this doesn't feel right. This isn't me. This is not authentic." And hey, wait a minute, what got me here was what been doing. And that's where I always, invoke Marshall Goldsmith who says, "Yeah, but what got you here won't get you there."
yes.
And so, that the whole point is you have to push through the S curve. And so the sooner you start, the sooner you dig in and get going and make the mistakes, the quicker you'll get through it. If you think about, learning a new language, you don't, join a class to learn Spanish or French or something like that and expect to go into a restaurant 2 weeks later and order perfectly, right? So why would we think that learning some sort of a new behavior would be any different? It's just a new behavioral language that we're learning.
Yeah, I think, yeah, sometimes I think about that. You think about children and how quickly they learn, like learning how to walk. They're falling down all the time, right? But they're
Yes.
just keep trying, and then they eventually can figure it all out. But I think at some point in our adult life, we stop doing that, right? We stop,
Yeah.
we don't want to fall down. We've fallen down enough, and we don't want to have that pain of that experience. So we do what's comfortable instead of what's difficult and hard and non uncomfortable, right?
That's right. I mean, in truth, if you most successful people have had setbacks, right? And
Yeah.
or that they've had to learn new skills and they weren't good at them. You and I were talking earlier. You said, you go back to your earlier podcast and go, "Oh my goodness." I go back to like some of my earlier classes and I look at some of the slides. I'm like, "Oh my
Yeah.
goodness." Right? But you got to get in the reps. Yeah,
Yeah.
you got to figure that out.
It's just curious. I was thinking about curiosity. I think one of the things
Mm.
that I've seen great leaders, and to your point about self-management, is the great leaders were always like a little curious. They were curious about
Hmm.
how am I coming off, or curious about, you know, themselves and self-development. Am I reading enough? Am I developing myself? And I think that what I saw was the best leaders that I worked with or around were curious about a lot of things, and they weren't kind of set in their ways. And the ones that sort of were struggling were the ones that weren't really developing themselves and not getting better and not curious about the world, and everyone around. They sort of were like, I've got it all figured out kind of bosses. And I think those are the ones that were sort of harder to manage. Does curiosity play a role in, self-management and self-development?
I think it does. I think that the curiosity in a couple of different ways. One is just being open-minded.
Mm,
When you're curious, you're sort of admitting even internally that I don't know this, right? I wonder is really what you're saying when you're curious. And that is, you could be curious about people, you could be curious about what makes something work and these kinds of things. But I think curiosity is a huge benefit
mm,
throughout life because if you think about it, lots of time you've had multiple careers in your life. I have. I think most of us will going forward. And curiosity is oftentimes what fuels it.
mm.
You're doing something and you get curious about something and it leads you over here, and then you get curious about something that leads you over here. There are no linear career paths, and we are happier when we are following our own curiosity. In fact, I also teach a class in creativity and innovation. And what I tell students is I say, find something that bugs you and go
Mm.
fix it. Right?
Ooh, yes.
Because if it bugs you, it bugs other people too.
Yes.
And then when you are curious about something and you have this intrinsic motivation, you are much more likely to have the tenacity to see it through.
Yeah, yeah, that makes so much sense. When I was teaching the last class I was teaching, we were talking about business development, and what we said was find a problem in the world that needs solving. That's where there's
Yeah.
an opportunity for a business, right? Find the pain point, or because if
Find the pain point.
if you if
Absolutely.
if you're feeling that pain, someone else is feeling that pain. It might be a business opportunity there too.
Yes,
And
I
that's how
totally
a lot of
agree.
businesses are just about solving a problem that people have.
Hmm.
Yeah, I love that. Um, you say that there are some leadership myths or a leadership myth. So what would you say some leadership myths are that people should stop believing in?
Oh gosh, how long you got? Um, so I would say a few things. One is that there's a certain leadership style. There is a style that works, and I would say, that style works for some people some of the time.
Interesting.
But you show me any effective leader, and in fact, very oftentimes in a class or in a talk, I'll show 10 or 12 leaders, and I'll put their photos up there, and I'll ask people, what do they have in common?
Oh
Right?
yeah.
Besides the fact that they're all leaders and they're probably above average in intelligence, and people, stumble around trying to figure out what it is, and I say, right, almost nothing, right?
Yeah.
Is that you have introverts, you have extroverts, you have people that came from wealth, those that struggled mightily, people that went to Tony colleges, and some that didn't go to college, and right. So there's really no background or personality or anything that really makes a leader, but that very oftentimes they have developed themselves so when that right opportunity came, they were ready for it.
Mm.
So, excuse me. I think that's one of the biggest myths is that there's a certain type and you have to be like that. And I think that does a disservice to everyone.
It's interesting too because I think what I see in a lot of leadership research is trying to find the optimum personality or the optimum leadership type. And I used to think I was a servant leader, and then I read more about transformational leadership. I said, well, probably a little bit more like a transformational leader. And then I read Jim Collins and Level 5 leader. I'm like, well, I think maybe I fit in some of those characteristics. And what I think, to your point, is that maybe in different times in my career I have used those traits as needed to be able to make a difference in the organizations I was leading. In other words, and not knowing it, but I may have pulled different concepts from different leadership styles to be able to get something done. I know, like in the military, most times it was very much a collaborative effort to run a submarine,
Mm.
and people don't realize that, but it was definitely feedback. What should we do? What do you think we should do? It was very collaborative. But when things went wrong or things went bad, it went very much top down. Everybody
Yes.
followed the orders. We knew exactly what to do, and everybody was trained in that way. So we could switch on a dime from a very top down autocratic kind of management because we needed to be able to make quick decisions and do things that could potentially be life threatening, to very collaborative. So we were able to turn that switch really quickly. And so because I've seen that in work effectively, I think I see that in leadership throughout even my business career, is that sometimes you have to throw the switch. Sometimes there's a problem and you
Yeah.
need the leader to step up and sort of take charge. And other times it's more collaborative depending on the situation.
Absolutely. And I think, also it goes back to self-understanding of who you are, what you care about, what your values are, because you will express things differently than I will. Because we're different people. We were raised differently. We were educated differently. We've had different life experiences. And so that is, one of the things that I think is really important is that we understand ourselves and why we're making certain decisions. And by the way, understanding ourselves helps us to make better decisions because you understand your values, you understand where your red lines are, and these kinds of things. If you don't have this, you will oftentimes make decisions that you'll look back on and say, "Why did I do that? Why,
Yeah.
what made me do that?" Because you didn't know where the red line was, you didn't know what your values were. So, to me, that understanding yourself is that red thread that goes through all of it, and again, it goes with that curiosity because that you're going as a. I would say if you understand yourself well, you can become the leader that only you can be. And
Mm,
that's why I always sort of rail against this idea that there's an optimal leadership style,
interesting.
because
Yeah.
the optimal leadership style depends on the situation. And what's needed. And sometimes it's very steady state or collaborative, as you said. And sometimes it's like, nope, we're doing this.
Yeah.
And because it depends on the context.
Yeah, the situation, the context do play a major role. That's very interesting, and I love that. I think because sometimes we do chase that idea of the perfect leader, the perfect leadership style. And the truth of the matter is, it's all shapes and sizes have been
All shapes and
yeah,
sizes.
effective
Yes.
leaders. Yeah, yeah. So that's interesting. So what are some other things that readers can expect to learn from reading this book?
Yeah, so I do spend a lot of time on understanding and managing yourself, understanding in particular, because I think that's something that most societies don't put a lot of emphasis in. We're kind of taught to behave a certain way or
Right.
to be a certain way or to want certain things, etc. So we don't have a lot of practice with understanding ourselves and looking inward and saying, yeah, but who am I and what do I want and how do I want to go about this? And sometimes that means taking a different path. So, but then, as I say, it's kind of that red thread that goes throughout because we talk about, okay, how do you lead other people? And I take them through several different exercises, and the idea is that just that we are very different. We're different from the people that are our peers, and so we need to be managed differently. So do the people that work with us. And I tell a story about the most important lessons I ever learned about leadership came from having kids. Because
Yes.
when I had my first one, I remember leaving the hospital and thinking if they knew how little I know about what I'm going to do, they would never let me take him home because it would be
So
child
true.
endangerment. But they didn't know. They let me take him home. And I'd never changed a diaper before, having my first son. And so I had to learn everything about him, but not just about how to take care of a baby, but how to take care of him and how to relate to him and his moods and likes and dislikes. So when my second son came along, I thought, got this now, right? And oh my goodness, he was nothing like his brother. So I had to, the diapering thing, that was the same, but nothing else was, because he had his own likes and dislikes, etc. And then when my daughter came along, I thought, okay, now I got it. And of course, I was wrong again.
Yeah.
And that just led me to realize, my gosh, if my own genetic material isn't the same,
Yeah.
why would I expect some random collection of strangers at work to be even remotely similar? And that's when it really kind of hit me that, yeah, that's what leadership is all about, is finding the different ways that people to connect with them.
I love that so much. I'm glad you said that. I often say that leadership is a people business, and people are messy and they're interesting and they have all these backgrounds, and they'll frustrate you and they'll surprise you and they'll so
Yes.
but I think part of being leaders, you just sort of have to, like, I'm going to immerse myself in people and know that they're nothing like me. And they're nothing.
Yes, I
They
think
don't
that's a
think like
very good
me.
assumption.
They don't think like me. Like you said, I mean, my boys are completely different. And I raised them sort of like differently. One needed a strong hand, the other one you needed, kind of a lighter hand, and a lighter touch.
Hmm.
And just, again, same genetic material, completely different people. Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And also as they grow older, that changes. And
Yes.
so you have to adapt your style to their changing style. So
Yeah.
it was one of, as I say, one of the very best lessons in leadership. And because parenting is a job you really care a lot about, right? So
Yeah.
you sweat the details a lot.
Yeah. And you think about like what are your values? Because you want to pass those on. You think about what success looks like. What does success for my children look like? Right. And so you force yourself to answer those tough questions, which you might not do in a business context. Right. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So some of those things really go back to the idea of understanding yourself and understanding what you want for your family, what you want for your children. Yeah. Yeah. That makes so much sense. I love how you tied that back to children and raising children. Well, this has been fantastic. What final message would you like to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, I guess I would go back to one thing I said earlier, which is to just keep in mind that we judge ourselves by our intentions, but other people judge us by our behaviors. So if you feel a little misunderstood, it might be because they're not quite in alignment.
I love that. That's a very important thing to learn from this episode is that your intentions might be one thing, but what are people feeling when you leave the room or when you walk into the room?
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing. So, what are your actions? Do your actions are they consistent with what your intentions are? And that
Mhm.
requires understanding yourself and
Yeah.
understanding the impact you're making in the world. Well, this has been fantastic. How can our listeners find out more about the work you do and this important new book?
Oh, thank you. A couple things I'd say, LinkedIn is one of the best ways to find me. I'm Margaret C. Andrews on LinkedIn. And or my website, which is just margaretandrews.com. Two of the best ways. And you can order the book online. It comes, audio, Kindle, ebook, hardcover, of those kinds of things. So it's available most places that books are sold, I would say.
Fantastic. And we're going to have links in the show notes for all of Margaret's resources. And I highly encourage you, she's the expert. The reason why we have her on the show is because she is an expert. She's been doing this for a long time. So if something in this conversation resonated, listeners, I highly encourage you to reach out to her either through LinkedIn or her website and, and talk to her, ask her a question. Say you heard her on the show and you had a question, and also go out and get the book. We'll have the link in the show notes for the book. Go out and get the book. Learn more about how to manage yourself, how to understand yourself. Because if you understand yourself, as Margaret has said, you're going to be a much better leader. You're going to be a much better leader for the people around you. And what we need more in the world are better bosses. So be a better boss. Get this book. Become a better boss. Margaret, thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for sharing your expertise and all the knowledge and things you've learned over the years, because I think you're helping us become better leaders. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I think our ideas are aligned of making the world a better place by improving the craft of leadership.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.